This is Fearless Careerist with Dr. Catherine Robert. On this episode, Catherine speaks with author and workplace communications coach Joel Schwartzberg about his career in public relations, speechwriting, and supporting professionals in improving their workplace communications.
It was a lousy speech. I was disconnecting with my audience, but I go back to it because one of the rules, if there are hard rules about communication and public speaking, is that the audience comes first. What do they want and need to hear? And then you reverse engineer it so that what you say matches that.
Here's Catherine Robert.
This week's guest clipped on a tie in sixth grade to deliver a speech and spent the next 11 years competing in speech and debate, winning both national and state championships in college. Through his extracurriculars of journalism and speech and debate, he was building experience toward what he didn't know then would turn into a life's passion and exciting career. Joel Schwartzberg, author of Get to the Point and the Language of Leadership, now ties rather than clips on a tie and trains professionals in successfully communicating their message. And he joins us here today. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you so much, Catherine. It's exciting to be here talking to you and to your audience.
Thank you. Let's start with that clip-on tie and your extracurriculars in school. Did you realize at the time that your talent in public speaking, editing the school paper, and structuring winning arguments for debates could translate into a career?
I first joined the speech and debate club, A, because my brother had joined it. This is in sixth grade in Texas. And B, because I had no athletic ability to speak of. So I wanted to be part of something. The chess club was out. The engineering club was out. So I did what my brother did. And really one of the first aha moments in my entire professional career and even pre-professional career was just getting up there and speaking competitively and learning for myself, even more so than from my coaches, what it meant to have a message and to deliver it as fearlessly as I could. And if I was able to do that. So even as I first completed one speech, I felt accomplished, and some part, maybe in the back of my mind, in the deep recesses, was this idea that this may be a skill I have that might be useful in my future. But it was buried. I think I had other concerns at that time.
What kind of work did you pursue when graduating from college?
Once I graduated college, and I did speech and debate for 11 years straight, from that sixth grade classroom and club all the way till I was a senior in college. For a little while, I coached teams at the University of Pennsylvania and Seton Hall University. And then I thought I was done, like a basketball player who moves on to whatever major they're going to be doing or moves on from college. Because one of the things I learned was that every time I interviewed for a job, I was using those communication skills and that confidence. Every time I spoke to a boss, every time I volunteered, and I did often, to go to conferences, because I kind of liked it, and it harkened back to all the speech and debate stuff I did, I was using all of those skills. So I said to myself, and this was another aha moment, I can actually teach this. So I worked with a company here in New York City called Media Bistro, and I became their first public speaking coach. This was while I was doing all sorts of jobs. I think it was around the time I was at Nickelodeon, but we can get into that. But as my side career, what do they call it? A side gig. I was teaching public speaking to students and professionals and PR people and some CEOs. So while I was moving up the career trajectory, which didn't have a lot to do with public speaking at that time, I was actually filling my hole for needing to talk about public speaking and do some public speaking myself.
Yeah, so you did the coaching the speakers on the side. You tried law school, but that wasn't quite what you wanted, right?
That did not take. I'd made good grades my whole life in school, and suddenly in law school, I was making not so good grades. And that was a red flag for me. I worked with a lot of people when I was in law school who loved the law, and more power to them for becoming lawyers. I didn't love the law. I thought maybe I could be like someone I saw in Law and Order, like I could give speeches in front of juries, and I had these unrealistic, fantastic notions. Once that blew up, and it blew up in law school, I decided to turn my trajectory toward things that employed some of my communication abilities, specifically public relations.
You looked over your skills, decided to apply for public relations, and
Right.
within 2 years, you found both a wife and a dream job at Nickelodeon. What did that work look like?
Well, the connection between working at a small PR firm in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and getting a job at Nickelodeon came through one big connection. There was a woman who was our newspaper writing consultant at the PR agency. She had a daughter who worked at Nickelodeon. She took an interest in me. Perhaps it was to set up with her daughter, but it actually worked out to be her other daughter. In any case, I met with her, and there were two job openings. One was working for a fledgling website for Nickelodeon. One was working for a fledgling TV channel called TV Land. And long story short, I went for the Nickelodeon job. They had me spend maybe 6 months writing uh, uh, ideas and questions for a quiz game they were producing.
Okay.
And then they liked the way I really committed myself to that. They liked the sense of humor I was writing into the questions, the answers, and the descriptions of the answers. So they basically hired me as one of two writers. And then one day, about a year in, they said, we don't really need writers, we need producers. The other writer was like, nah. But I said, yeah, well, then I'll be a producer. So then I became a writer producer, and eventually I was the head writer for Nickelodeon Online and a senior online producer there.
Awesome. I've learned that in public relations, the jobs only last as long as the initiative, program, or company that you're working for. Of the roles you've had in PR, you mentioned that leaving Nickelodeon stung the worst.
Yeah, that was the big setting. I mean, I will say this. I was built for PR because unlike advertising where you work on a plan for 6 months or a year, in PR, you could have an idea one day and put it into action the next day. You're doing a ton of writing, a ton of creative writing. So I was really fulfilled by it. But of course, if someone says, hey, you want to work at Nickelodeon, who am I to say no? But about 2 years in, they did a sort of a revolution in their thinking. They did a recomposition of staff, and they asked roughly 20 people to leave. I was one of them, and I didn't think I would be at Nickelodeon forever, but I was having fun. I was doing well. I was getting good reviews, which is what happens, especially when working in television or with huge brands. Eventually, they come around to thinking, let's stop that and let's start it anew. That's exactly what they did. And I was kind of lost for a while. I'd never been let go or job eliminated before. It was always my decision to leave an organization.
Yeah.
So I felt grief over losing that job that I loved. I felt grief over losing a big brand connection like Nickelodeon. I felt grief over not being one day being with all my colleagues, and the very next day, pack up your stuff. I will see you never. So it was very, very hard on me, and it's hard to find another Nickelodeon like job. It took some time to really reevaluate what I liked most about working at Nickelodeon, with skills I was leveraging, and how to take that and to find a new job that was leveraging those skills.
Yeah, you suffered through some gig and short-term work after
Right.
Nickelodeon. Ugh.
Right.
But then you had good experiences at Time for Kids and later at Now on PBS with roughly 4 years each.
Right.
Any highlights from that time?
The really big job after Nickelodeon was building the website for Time for Kids online. Time for Kids is the classroom magazine of Time magazine. And what was really fulfilling about that was when I worked on Nickelodeon, I had two big interests. One was horror. I was always doing the scary shows online. But the other was real things that matter to kids. So Nickelodeon had a thing called Kids Pick the President. They had things like the Kids' Choice Awards, which is involving real kids, not just SpongeBob and Rugrats over and over again. And I really liked those because I felt I was making a difference. So when I got the job at Time for Kids, that was real news for kids. On the website, we got to be super creative. We brought kids to the political conventions, kid reporters. We created the Kid Reporter program. We had games, but I made sure that all the games were teaching kids about news or about their lives as students with teachers and principals and those as characters. So that was fun. And then I was asked to oversee all of Time Inc.'s kid websites. So that was Time for Kids and Sports Illustrated for Kids. And I'll tell you something, Catherine, I want to stop here. I didn't have to take that job. I could have stayed happy at Time for Kids. I might still be there today if I had not jumped, pushed by my own ambition. Now, I was to be this big job. And now I'm the head of all kid websites for Time Inc. Yay, look at my card. Isn't that nice? My mom, dad, I'm running all websites with Time, That lasted about a year and a half. And then there was another sort of rethink where they brought those websites back from this unit I was part of back to ownership of the magazines. It again left me without a real job. I could not go back to Time for Kids. That bridge closed. And I was sort of lost again. And I again missed that collegiality, that creativity, that feeling of doing something important for kids. I took a bunch of little jobs here and there that were interesting, but I recognized were bridge jobs. I never closed my eyes for opportunity or thought I would end there. And then I interviewed for the job at Now on PBS, which was a PBS TV show, a news show for grown-ups, not for kids. But I was lucky enough that the guy who picked my resume and I interviewed with first, he had graduated from Emerson College like I do. And he held that preparation at Emerson College with a certain degree of esteem. So that he brought me in. This was back in the day when you didn't need years and years of experience. You just make a good case for yourself and they'll take a chance for you, especially at somewhere nonprofit like PBS. So I went there and I worked there until that show was canceled. So that was about 4 years.
I want to take us back to a little bit more into Nickelodeon and Time for Kids, that era, because it was so radically revolutionary at the time, right? The new technology of the internet was allowing us to reach new audiences, kids specifically, right? Prior to the internet, we had Highlights Magazine. Yeah. We just had limited ways to communicate to large swaths of children, right? Let's talk about how you participated in that conversation with what is and isn't appropriate for kids, and what did that look like every day?
Sure. First I'll say when I was hired there, we could do anything we want. We created interactive stories. We created brand new characters. We created brand new games as long as it was silly and had green slime and respected kids. It was good. About a year later, there came this fixation on brands. Mm-hmm. And then it was everything Rugrats. So it was a good name for me for actually preparing it for later, when it's not just about taking the theme of a brand, but actually promoting the brand and having a commercial interest. But the interesting things I learned at Nickelodeon, one of them, for example, was we were told never to use the word fun. Because if we use the word fun, we are describing something that we could create that was fun. In other words, we should tell a joke, create a scenario, create a game that was fun, but not tell kids this is fun. That's like when you tell a joke, telling someone to laugh afterwards. Like you shouldn't need to do that. If you don't use the word fun, hey kids, this will be fun, it prevents you from describing, and it really forces you to demonstrate and illustrate in the work. So that was the one thing. Also, someone told me that the reason Nickelodeon uses the word slime is because it can't use the other words, vomit or snot. Those are cross the line. And there are people who I work with who cross the line into jokes about bathrooms and things like that. There's a word for that. I forget it. That kind of humor.
Bathroom humor is what we call it.
Humor, yeah. And basically the higher-ups had to coach us into where that line is drawn. But a lot of it was based on respect for the kids and treating them as young, thinking, fun-loving, fun-exploring people. Not to treat them like we're parents or teachers.
Did you have different age groups? So different games and different jokes were for different age groups, or was it just universally all kids?
It was kind of universally all kids. We had instructions for a game. We had to make those funny and make it simple. And it's interesting you say that, because a lot of the things I tell my clients as a public speaking coach is, even if your audience understands those SAT words and those acronyms, still bring it down, because it will be less taxing on their brain to hear that. Now, for someone who doesn't know those words, you're not doing your job. So you might as well bring it all down to a very simple level. And that's something I learned at Nickelodeon too. So we weren't breaking it down. I will say Time for Kids magazine had an older magazine and a younger magazine, but on the website, we didn't differentiate.
Okay. Were you actually doing the coding or were you just doing the writing at Time for Kids?
I was just doing the ideating. That's the fancy way of saying, creative thinking
Yeah.
and brainstorming. And we're very resourceful. I did a lot of taking pictures around my apartment. I took pictures at the Museum of Natural History. I brought them into our designer. We had no AI. The pictures we had were all like pictures you'd find in a frame at a store. So we had to be really resourceful. We also wanted to cut costs. So I learned a lot about that there. But they did one day say, all right, well, everyone needs to learn HTML. Because we work on a website, we can't really say we have producers here who don't know HTML.
We need to be able to do quick edits, right? Everybody needs to be able to fix things. Yeah.
To be honest, I failed at it. I tried it. Yeah, I knew how to bold things or put them in italics. I knew how to break a line.
Yeah.
Like very, very basic HTML. But it was not my skill set to sort of learn coding. Fortunately, my creative ability and my being able to envision what can happen on a website. This wasn't even a website. This was on America Online at the time. But what can function in that environment and on that canvas, that was more important than my being able to code it, because we did have serious coders there. So as long as I could communicate my vision to the coder and to the designer, then I didn't really need to learn that language. And then after a few years, you may know what happened. It was all WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Now nobody needs to code because everything is on Canva. It's so simple to move things around that you just do it with your pointer and your mouse.
Oh, yeah. Any chance I get, I like to emphasize to younger generations how much harder it was.
Yeah. I mean, you don't even have to make pictures anymore with AI. I'm constantly, when I post on LinkedIn, I go right to Gemini. It creates a picture for me. I tell it to, fix it here and there.
Yeah.
And it's perfect.
Yeah. So speaking of the website, you had moved into some leadership roles in public relations. You talk about an early leadership mistake in your book, The Language of Leadership, in which you were giving a celebratory speech to the organization. And you talked about, and I quote here, how much the moment meant to me, given my professional history. And then you explain that it fell flat since quote, it mattered to me well above what mattered to my audience.
Right.
How did you recover and learn from that big, unpopular speech?
Some people, I think I never recovered. But I did have to learn that lesson. And it was important that feedback got back to me secondhand, that the publisher of the magazine didn't think I gave the best speech. I don't like to use those phrases, not the best, I like to be, all right, it was a lousy speech. I was disconnecting with my audience, but I go back to it because one of the rules, if there are hard rules about communication and public speaking, is that the audience comes first. What do they want and need to hear? And then you reverse engineer it so that what you say matches that. I took it as if someone was giving me an Academy Award. Oh, I worked so hard for this. I'm so appreciative of this. And it was all about me, like they gave me a trophy. Yeah. Nobody gets trophies anymore. You get opportunities. And if you get an opportunity to move up or to be in charge of something, the first thing you need to do is show appreciation. So if I could go back in time, the first thing I would do is call out my staff for how hard they worked and their contributions, is talk about how this website contributes to this brand and gets it in front of more eyeballs and makes it more participatory for kids and interactive for kids, fulfilling the mission of Time for Kids. There was so much I could have said, but I was too focused on me and not focused on the needs of that moment.
Yeah, it hurts. It's important for younger professionals to know that we've all done something horrible like that, and it feels terrible at the time.
Yes.
In the end, and you don't want to learn from it right when it happens, but in the end, it's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's this sort of idealized phrase, there's no failure, there's only learning. That may be a little too simple, but the substance of it is true. When you move away from it, you have to look back on any kind of constructive feedback, any failure. And if you can find the learning in that and be able to communicate that learning, then it will become valuable for you. And it goes back to, I'm doing a lot of writing about job interviewing. And if there's anything you need to understand about job interviewing is they don't want to know your failure. They don't want to know when something didn't work out. They want to know what you learned from the failure. They want to know how you made yourself better or how you recovered from that failure, because they want to know that you're a person who can learn new things, who is resilient. That learning becomes a benefit in so many more ways than just internal. And I'm thankful for them, honestly.
Yeah. I'm interested in this conflict of ambition and, mixed with family decisions, life changing, and being in that amazing job. Earlier you mentioned that I could have stayed at Time for Kids, forever. But you know what? Could you really have?
Probably not. Although I'm not sure what would have enticed me to leave, assuming I would have worked my way up the chain of command. Though I was basically the executive producer of the website. So I may have looked for opportunities to move beyond communicating to children and kids and maybe move to do more things like I was eventually doing now. But one of the things my wife and I often talk about is doing a fulfillment audit, a self-fulfillment audit. And if you ask me when I was young, and I said, what fulfills me? I would say an amazing title, working for an amazing company, impressing a lot of people, going to conferences and saying, look at me, I'm attached to this brand. And as we get older and more mature, that definition of fulfillment changes. And right now, if I were to define it, I would say, I want to be doing what I'm best at, and I want to be doing what I enjoy most. And everything else is very secondary to that. I'm no longer as interested in titles, certainly. To some degree, I'm not that interested in making 20% more salary than I made before. I'm more interested in coming home at the end of the day, feeling like I made a difference, feeling like I leveraged my skills, and feeling like my job is a joy and not just a job.
So at the time when you did make that leap and left your security of where you were, moved your family to a different state, was it worth the move?
Well, this is when now PBS was canceled. So we moved to Washington, D.C. because they knew me at what I like to call the PBS mothership. And they asked me to oversee a big news project there. And my wife teaches private school. So we're like, all right, let's go where the job is. There were two jobs. There was a job opening at AARP and a job opening at PBS. Mm-hmm. And the PBS one was it just spoke to my heart a lot more than the AARP. I mean, I wasn't even close to 50 yet at the time. So, I felt a little distanced from that. So even though the AARP job actually had a higher salary, I took the PBS job. I worked there for a year, and my wife found a fantastic job at a local private school, but we were not happy with the location. I don't mean to throw DC under the bus, but you're not going to get a good bagel or a good pizza. And, I was farther from my family, my brother, and it just didn't make sense. Plus, my project that I was working on, it became clearer and clearer that it would not get to fruition. So there was writing on the wall. What happened was another connection of mine was working at another TV network, this time in New York City, and needed an executive producer of this new news website on a channel called Current TV, which was founded by Al Gore. So I came back to New York City to take that job.
Great. At this point, the seemingly disconnected segments of your career are starting to come together.
Yeah, I always said, so here I am overseeing websites. And I said to myself, this is enjoyable for me. And because I always considered myself a writer. But a writer, the platform for writing can be a book, it can be an online article, it can be a blog, and it can be a website. It can even be an icon or a picture. All of these things communicate. So I was looking at a web page and thinking, what can I do with the tools and the conditions I have here so that I can create something creative and that makes a point to people. So that's why I enjoyed that. It didn't always involve writing. Well, it always involved writing to some degree, but the level of writing I was doing was bigger or smaller. And as most of us know, the higher you go up in a company, the less, as a writer, if you did some writing, you're going to be doing less writing and writing more plans and doing more management and overseeing people and things like that. So I was doing less and less writing over time. But it was creative. There was a fair amount of writing. I was doing all the proofreading and copy editing of other people. So I thought, well, this is as good as it's going to be. I mean, what can be better? I don't know. You know what would be cool? I guess a speechwriter. That would be really, really cool. But when does that happen? So I was just happy sort of running these websites at that time.
You found your voice and leadership footing with over a decade as the senior director of the strategic and executive communications at the ASPCA following your time as...
Yeah, running the website for a show called Moyers and Company. With Bill Moyers, yeah.
Tell us about what led you to that work.
Sure. I was at Moyers and Company. I was overseeing that website, and the content was close to my passion, not a direct hit. We were doing a lot of, or Bill Moyers was doing a lot of conversations, a lot of interviews. There was a very documentary feel to it. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't the biggest consumer of documentaries. I like pop culture. I like lots of different things. I like animals. So I started looking, as I always do, and, you lose nothing for keeping your eyes open on the jobs out there. Never lose sight of that. Even if it's a unicorn, it might be out there. And if you're not looking, you may miss something beautiful. So one day I was looking through LinkedIn and I saw a job for a speechwriter for the ASPCA in animal welfare. And I thought, wow, if there's something I love, it's the cats who live with me. I like the idea of animal welfare. And hey, didn't I always want to be a speechwriter? Wasn't that an idea of something I wanted to do, like selling a script or, doing a stand-up comedian? I mean, it was that fantastic. I went in, and long story short, I could interview well because I had public speaking training. I had done some speeches on the side at that time. I'd done a lot of public speaking coaching, and I'd done a lot of writing. And if we put it all together, I succeeded in what I most wanted to do, and that was getting an interview. Job one was not getting a job even. I needed to get in that room. Now, something that else helped was someone at the ASPCA reached out to me before I got that job, and I actually came into those offices and coached her for a big speech she was about to give at a town hall. She actually put in an internal recommendation for me as well. But all went well. They put me through some writing tests. I must have had like 4 or 5 different interviews. They're very strict about their interview process. But yeah, in 2013, I was hired as the speechwriter for the CEO, who had only been there about 4 months. So he was new and I was new, which is cool because we got to learn about each other. And I really enjoyed that experience. Just a lot of writing, and speechwriting is so much fun. Now, this is before AI, so we're all on our own. We learn to use AI in, appropriate ways, not inappropriate ways. But I loved writing speeches. I loved the idea, even if it was under someone else's byline and someone else was saying it. I love the idea of taking an extremely important point and through your words and through your behavior, making it relevant and having impact on an audience. And what I always say is, what is impact when you give a speech? Impact is making people feel, think, or act. And when you break it down like that, you can understand how to tweak some things and make some things more precise so you reach those goals of moving an audience.
So at this time, you started writing your book called Get to the Point, and you were coaching in your spare time. What made you eventually turn to writing, speaking, and coaching full time?
I had been writing and publishing for some time at that point. I had taken a course, and I was fortunate enough to write an essay for New York Times Magazine. I was also fortunate enough to write an article for Newsweek and some other publications. So I had some confidence about my writing. And I wrote some articles about public speaking. But one day I thought to myself, in all of my coaching, is there a novel aspect of what I'm coaching that would make a great book? Because you could throw a lock in a bookstore or online and find 100, 200 books on public speaking, going back to the 1970s. And it really was this idea of making a point. About 3 or 4 years into my public speaking consultancy, I would ask my people, hey, you're gesturing great, your volume is great, everything I learned in speech and debate, your motion is great. Just so we're on the same page, what's your point? And they wouldn't have a point. They would have a theme, they would have an idea, they would have a topic, they would have a catchphrase or a definition, a category, but not a point. And that's when I said, aha, I need to sort of, for myself, redefine what the word point means and teach people how to make points and not just cover topics. So I went to a bookstore in Penn Station, New York, and I looked for all the books that seemed like a book I would write. And a bunch of them had the same publisher. It's called Barrett Kohler Publishing. They're in Oakland, California. And I just reached out. They had a little link at the time on their website that said, if you want to write for us, you can send it to this guy. And I learned how to write a proposal. Proposals aren't that long, really. I tried to build up my platforms, because that's important, because I need to also publicize my work as best I could. And they loved the idea of what was at the time how to make a point, but later became get to the point. And that was in 2017. And then we just came out with a second edition this year, also called Get to the Point.
Well, let's give our listeners one of the first of many helpful lessons in the book, which is the I believe test. Can you describe the I believe test?
Sure. I can describe to me in the face the difference between a point and a topic, but I wanted something that people could use, like a tool or a mechanism where you plop what you think is a point on one end and you get a red or blue light or a red or green light on the other end. I also wanted it to be so simple that a fifth grader could use it. So this is it. It's called the I believe that test. Basically, you take what you think is your point, let's say podcasting, and you add the words, I believe that, to the front of it, and you ask yourself one question. Is this now a complete sentence? Would it impress my fourth grade language arts teacher as a complete sentence and not a fragment? So let's apply that to podcasting. Is I believe that, and this will go back to your teaching days perhaps, is I believe that podcasting a complete sentence? No. I believe that the power of podcasting? No. I believe that effective podcasting? No. I believe that the evolution of podcasting? No. It forces you to say something like, I believe that podcasting is the best way to reach millennial listeners. And that's an audience we're trying to reach with our brand. Now, that makes people go, oh, that's sort of interesting now. Now you're making a point that has what I call an X and a Y. The X is a means of achieving an outcome. So here the means is podcasting. And the outcome is the impact you want, reaching potential millennial customers. So now we have a full-fledged point. It clears the I believe that test because it's a complete sentence.
Right. And
you're stating not just an impact. Oh, we should reach our millennial audience, to which someone might say, yeah, of course, but how? Or they hit just like a mechanism. Hey, we should do more podcasting. And the question might be, yeah, podcastings are cool, but why? So you need both of those points. We should do podcasting to increase the chances we will be able to reach a millennial audience. And that's what I teach with the I believe that test, how to make that fully fledged point that gives people the understanding of, aha, you've identified something I care about and you've given me a means to achieve it.
Thank you. I feel like you can take the book and read it before you start writing a speech and then use it as a workbook after, right? To help edit your speech.
Yeah, and it's not like a big tome like some of these thought leadership books. It's really short, and that's important because if I can't tell you how to get to the point in less than 20,000 words, then I'm like a dentist with bad teeth. I need to walk the walk and talk the talk. So yeah, a lot of people read it and then they go back and they highlight parts of it because it's full, and I wanted to fill it with tips, not just philosophy. A lot of do's, a lot of don'ts, a lot of great things to do, a lot of mistakes. I give examples of mistakes. I give examples of great speeches, and not just the presidents and Martin Luther King. I don't find those useful. I provide speeches from singers and actors who are giving speeches on occasion. I provide examples of people who are giving speeches to graduating classes at college. These are people who are normally not in the business of public speaking.
Mhm.
But somehow through training and their own realization, they understood how to make an important point to people, not just talk about themselves, or in the case of winning an award, not just thanking 13 people and sitting down.
Yeah. Well, what's your favorite part of the work you're doing now?
My favorite part is when somebody says to me, that makes a difference to me. And I feel like I can communicate with my colleagues more efficiently. I can make our mission, the mission of our organization, more clear to customers. Sometimes I work with people who create safety mechanisms in buildings, and they're responsible for making sure these buildings are safe. And they need to communicate what people should do. Have someone hold the ladder while you climb up it. And them understanding how that can make something safer because that message is clearer and not buried.
Yeah.
Or even if we're just talking about speeches, making sure people receive your point. If they come back to me with feedback that says, what I learned from you, and it's not the totality of it, it's one thing. It's the I believe that test. It's speaking louder. It's embracing pauses. If it's just one little thing that makes a difference in their ability to make people feel, think, and act, then I'm just tremendously fulfilled by that because I've done my job. My job is not about writing books and articles. My job is helping people become more effective communicators.
You must have helped this one person, like the best speech I ever saw. It was somebody talking about ladders, about using ladders, but he had a great tag. It was, you're going down. If you don't follow these steps, passes the I believe test, you're going down. And so we joke about it. Everybody that had that training, it was a whole bunch of teachers. And years later, we all still will say, you're going down all at the same time. So that's a powerful speech, isn't it?
That's funny. And I'll say one more thing. Everyone's talking about storytelling now. Like storytelling is a big thing. Tell a story, tell a story. And we say it as if the goal is to tell an electrifying story, like we're making a movie. But we forget the point of telling that story. We're not telling the story to entertain people or to just tell a story. In fact, that's a secondary goal. We're telling a story to illustrate a point. If the story doesn't illustrate a point effectively, there's no point in telling the story. It may be riveting, but it's not relevant. So again, I want to give people tools. So I always say, after you tell that story, and you'll see this in TED Talks all the time, say these words: that story illustrates why we should. That story proves what happens if we. That case study is a perfect example of what happens when we. So see what you're doing? You're pointing your audience to the point of the story, not just the entertaining details of the story.
Right. Oh, good advice. All right. Now, my favorite last question. What advice do you have for young professionals who are just getting started in their careers?
I often say to college kids, think of one line as what you love to do and one line as what you do best. So that's like a skill. And this is something you just love thinking about or an area that you love. Like I love horror films. Find out where those lines connect. And that intersection is where you want to point your career. It won't be your first job. It may not be your fourth job, but you want to head toward it so everything in your resume points to the skills you have and the love you have for that particular area. If you want to work in animal welfare, get jobs in animal welfare. If you want to be a writer, look for jobs that have you writing so you can see in your resume this trajectory that speaks to either your skills or your passion. And then one day you'll find a job, as I did, that connects both. The only other thing I would say is with each job, really pay attention and learn as much as you can about the way a workplace works, about the way people are succeeding. One of the things you'll learn is that people who volunteer move up the chain. People who speak up at meetings, hey, any questions? Even if you invent something, just like the questions you need to ask at the end of an interview. If you're at a job and there's a meeting and someone says any question, be the person to ask a question. You do need to showcase yourself at work to get a promotion. And if you do get a promotion, and even if you just showcase yourself, you're going to learn so much more than if you just stay in your cubby and do the best job you can.
Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. Joel Schwartzberg, it's been a true pleasure having you as my guest. Thank you for sharing today.
It's my pleasure, and I love talking to you, Catherine.
To learn more about Joel's books and coaching services, see the link in our show notes for his website at joelschwartzberg.net. I'm so excited you're here. And remember, you're not alone on your career journey. Together, we can share our stories, move boldly into that perfect job, and we can light the path for our future fearless careerists. I'm Catherine Robert, and I can't wait to hear your story.
Fearless Careerist is available on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. Subscribe there or visit us at catherinerobertedd.com.